On Christmas night, in front of twinkling lights and a room full of his family, he handed me divorce papers like he was presenting a gift. His smile was smug. His best friend, half drunk, near the fireplace, had bet he'd see me cry. Women are predictable, he'd laughed. My name is Emily, and I didn't cry. I signed the papers with a steady hand, looked him dead in the eyes, and whispered, "Merry Christmas." Then I pulled a golden wrapped box from under the table, small, neat, deliberate, and placed it beside his untouched wine. He laughed at first, but when he opened it and saw what was inside, his own signature on a notarized prenup he drunkenly signed a year ago, now legally updated and reinforced, his face turned gray. And then I handed him one more envelope, a sonogram photo. 8 weeks, I said softly, as the entire room froze. He thought he'd ended everything that night. He didn't know I had planned my beginning. Before the silence, before the careful smiles and calculated words, there was love, real, breathless, beautiful love. Ryan and I met in college, two idealists caught in the whirlwind of campus protests, midnight debates, and rainy bookstore dates. He was magnetic, the kind of man who made promises sound like poetry. I was majoring in early childhood education. He was set on business law. We dreamed of a brownstone in Brooklyn, Sunday bagels, and 3 kids with unruly curls. When he got the job offer in Chicago, I packed my life into 3 suitcases and followed him. "We'll build this together," he'd said, eyes gleaming with ambition and certainty. I believed him. More than anything, I believed us. I left behind my tenure track opportunity, my family, and the city that felt like home. But I didn't regret it, at least not then. Our apartment was small but filled with laughter. I decorated it with thrifted art and secondhand bookshelves, while Ryan brought home stories from firm dinners and office politics. We made pasta at midnight, danced barefoot in the kitchen, and whispered secrets under hand-me-down quilts. He used to call me his compass, the one who kept him grounded when the world spun too fast. We were inseparable for those first few years. I supported him through late night bar prep sessions, job interviews, and client dramas. When he passed the bar, I baked his favorite chocolate cake and cried happy tears when he lifted me off the floor, spinning me in our cramped living room. He was charming, quick witted, and knew exactly how to make people fall in love with his version of the story. At parties, he'd tell the story of how I once rescued a cat from a storm drain, adding dramatic flair and pantomimed rain for effect. I'd blush, swat his arm, and he'd kiss my cheek like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And for a long time, I believed I was. I didn't notice the shift right away. Or maybe I did and just didn't want to name it. Love, after all, isn't supposed to unravel so quietly. Still, in those early years, I gave everything: my time, my career, my identity. I became Ryan's wife more often than I was Emily. I made excuses when he canceled plans with my family. I took up freelance tutoring to keep the lights on during the months he insisted we invest in his ventures. I learned how to stretch a grocery budget, iron his shirts just right, and match his wine with dinner. They'd bring me flowers. Not often, but when he did, I'd press the petals between the pages of my journals like keepsakes of something sacred. I still have them somewhere, faded, delicate, like our love became. There were moments when I'd catch glimpses of the man I fell in love with, a joke whispered during a long drive, his hand finding mine during a thunderstorm, and I'd tell myself, "See, he's still in there." But looking back now, I think I was holding on to a memory, not a man. The love we had wasn't fake. It just wasn't built to last the way I thought it was. And in trying to keep it alive, I forgot how to love myself. It was my first real mistake. One summer, I remember we stayed up until dawn, painting our bedroom walls a deep teal. We laughed when we realized we'd missed spots everywhere. Imperfection is charm, he said, pulling me into a messy kiss, blue smudges on our cheeks. That night, wrapped in drop cloths and laughter, I felt like I had everything. I clung to those memories in later years, like armor, like proof. We used to be so happy, I'd whisper to myself when things started feeling off. And that's the dangerous thing about love that once felt real. It convinces you to stay long after it's safe. Ryan wasn't a villain, not then. He was a man chasing his dreams, and I was the woman who cheered too loudly for him, even when I lost my own voice in the process. But I didn't see it like that. Not yet. Back then, I thought love meant endurance. So I endured. The changes came quietly, like fog slipping through a window you forgot to close. At first, it was just little things. Ryan stopped asking me how my day was. He'd come home from work, drop his keys on the table, and scroll on his phone through dinner. If I brought up something I was excited about, a new book I was reading, a student who'd done something sweet, he'd nod absently or say, "That's nice," without looking up. Then came the comments. "Do you really need another sweater? Didn't you just buy one?" "You're getting a little too into those cooking videos. Why do you always take things so personally?" I laughed them off in the beginning, told myself he was tired, that law was stressful, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But soon I started second guessing myself before I spoke. I stopped sharing stories altogether. He never yelled, never hit. Ryan was smarter than that. His weapons were quieter, dismissive glances, exaggerated sighs, the way he'd interrupt me in conversations with our friends. Once, I wore a red dress to a friend's engagement party. It had taken me weeks to find something I felt confident in. Ryan looked me up and down and said, "A bit much, don't you think?" I changed. At another dinner, I made a joke about forgetting to pay the water bill once. He laughed and turned to his colleague. "Emily couldn't survive a week without me." The whole table laughed. I smiled too, but it felt like my skin was on fire. After that, I became careful. I curated my words, my outfits, my emotions. I became a version of myself that wouldn't embarrass him. That's what he said once. "Don't embarrass me in front of my boss." And I took it to heart. My world grew smaller. Friends drifted. I stopped posting on social media, stopped calling my sister back. I missed 2 book club meetings in a row and never returned. When my mom visited for the holidays, Ryan loudly pointed out the dust on the blinds. "Emily's been busy with her projects," he said, air quotes included. My mom gave me a long look but said nothing. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection and not recognize the woman looking back. She was quiet, tired, constantly calculating. I began tracking Ryan's moods like weather forecasts. Was today a storm or just cloudy? He criticized how I folded the towels, how much I spent on groceries, how I parked the car. If I pushed back, even gently, he'd sigh like I was unreasonable. "You always make things difficult." Still, I told myself this was marriage. Not a fairy tale, but compromise. He provided, after all. He wasn't cheating. He wasn't violent. At least, that's what I told myself. But late at night, when the house was quiet and I couldn't sleep, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder when I stopped laughing and why he never looked for me in the silence. It was during one of those nights, lying awake next to his turned back, that I realized I hadn't been touched gently in months. Not with intention, not with care, only routine, like patting a dog or brushing lint from a jacket. I started keeping track, not just of what he said, but what he didn't, how he never asked if I was okay, how he never apologized after belittling me, how he never listened, only waited for his turn to talk. Once, I got sick with a stomach virus and spent 2 days barely able to stand. Ryan brought me a glass of water, set it on the nightstand, and said, "Let me know when you're better. This energy is depressing." Then he left for the gym. It sounds so small, doesn't it? 100 little paper cuts, no bruises, no shouting matches, just a constant erosion until one day you wake up and realize you've been carved into a version of yourself you no longer recognize. And worse, um, you let it happen, you made excuses for it, you called it love. Even then, I didn't tell anyone. I wore my silence like armor, convinced that if I just tried harder, smiled wider, loved better, things would go back to how they were. But the truth is, they already had. This was who he was now. And I had become someone I didn't recognize, waiting for permission to feel seen. The night it all shattered wasn't loud. There were no slammed doors or broken dishes, just a sentence said too casually in front of too many people. It was Ryan's firm's annual winter gala, a glittering hotel ballroom, waiters in black ties, and the sharp scent of champagne in the air. I wore a navy gown I'd borrowed from my sister, hair pinned up, earrings he had once gifted me for our third anniversary. I wanted to look the part, elegant, supportive, the wife of a rising partner. He had already downed 2 drinks when we arrived. As we stood near a group of his colleagues, laughing politely at an intern's awkward story, Ryan leaned in and muttered into my ear, just loud enough for the others to catch it too. "You know, you're just like the rest of them, clingy, always needing more." The laughter died. Someone coughed. I stood frozen, my smile strained, my wine trembling slightly in my hand. Um, he didn't notice. Or didn't care. Later that night, as he stumbled through our front door reeking of whiskey and arrogance, I followed him quietly. I poured him another drink, placed it gently in his hand, and asked, "You always joke about leaving me. Maybe we should make it official." He snorted. "You really think I need a prenup to protect my fantasy football money?" He grabbed a napkin, scribbled his signature without reading what I'd written, just a mock agreement I had drafted months ago, and passed out on the couch. But I didn't forget. The next day, I took that napkin to Jenny, my oldest friend, and conveniently a paralegal at a family law firm. She looked at it, then at me. "He did this willingly?" I nodded. She exhaled, then got to work. Within a week, we had it notarized, copied, and stored. A private email account, a backup folder, a printed file hidden behind old tax returns. That was when something inside me shifted. Not fear, not revenge, just readiness. But I wasn't planning anything yet until Valentine's Day. He said he was traveling for work, a last-minute client emergency in Seattle. I spent the evening with takeout and a glass of wine. The next morning, while folding his laundry, I found a hotel receipt in his jeans pocket. 2 glasses of rosé, chocolate-covered strawberries. A deluxe room overlooking the lake. The date, February 14th. I didn't cry, I scanned it, filed it, and moved on, quietly. More signs followed. Whispered phone calls, texts from names I didn't recognize, perfume that wasn't mine on his coat. I kept a log, a digital trail, voice recordings when he got sloppy. Emails to Jenny, who never questioned, just archived. Then came the message that changed everything. 2 weeks before Christmas, he was passed out after a dinner party. I saw his phone buzz, unlocked, a message from his friend Nate. She doesn't suspect a thing. I'll file on Christmas. Want front row seats? Followed by a gif of a woman crying. I took a screenshot, deleted the message, emailed it away. That night, as he snored beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my hand on my stomach. I hadn't told him yet. I was pregnant. 7 weeks. And suddenly, every decision mattered more. He wanted me broken. But I was about to break everything he built with a smile. The days after that text were filled with clarity. I knew then that I wasn't just trying to protect myself. I was preparing for war, a quiet war, one fought with timestamps and tone recordings, not shouting. I started marking my planner with small symbols. An X for every suspicious late night, a circle for receipts he couldn't explain, a dot for lies I could prove. To anyone else, it looked like meal planning. To me, it was evidence. He grew bolder. Maybe he thought I was too tired to notice. Maybe he thought he'd broken me down enough to become harmless. But he forgot something vital. Silence doesn't mean surrender. One afternoon, he left for the gym. I synced his phone to our shared laptop, backed up every message, every thread. I saved voice memos where he mocked me to his friends, ones where he admitted he was just stringing her along until the paperwork's done. I forwarded everything to Jenny. Her reply was short but firm. We've got him. That weekend, his parents came for an early Christmas dinner. He was charming, attentive, laughing too loudly at his father's stories. I served roast duck, poured wine, smiled. No one saw the fire behind my eyes. When his friend Nate arrived with dessert, he gave me a smug look, like a man holding a secret he couldn't wait to reveal. They thought I'd cry, that I'd plead. Instead, I topped off their wine glasses, kissed Ryan's cheek, and asked if anyone wanted extra gravy. Behind every nod and every step, I rehearsed, not what I'd say, but what I wouldn't do. No tears, no scene, just a signature and a surprise. A week later, I stood in the kitchen wrapping a small gold box. Inside, a clean, ironclad copy of the prenup Ryan had once mocked. Notarized, filed, backed by legal review. Alongside it, I placed a second envelope, a copy of the sonogram. I tied the ribbon with steady hands. Let them bet on my tears, I thought. I was betting on my preparation, and I never bet unless I know I'll win. 2 days before Christmas, I watched him from the hallway as he joked with Nate again. She'll fall apart, he said, voice full of misplaced confidence. That's what they do. I stood unseen, one hand on my stomach, the other gripping a tray of cocoa. I didn't feel rage. I felt ready. Let them think I'm fragile. Let them think they've won. Because on Christmas, I wasn't going to break. I was going to rise. In the days leading up to Christmas, I felt like I was floating, trapped somewhere between panic and precision. On the surface, I functioned. I baked cookies, wrapped gifts, sent out greeting cards with smiling photos from a shoot Ryan forgot to attend. I smiled at neighbors, answered calls from my sister, and kept my voice even when Ryan asked if I'd remembered to polish his cufflinks. But inside, I was unraveling. Every hour brought a new wave of doubt. What if I had misread something? What if the court dismissed the prenup? What if Ryan fought for custody just to hurt me? I had dreams where I stood in court, screaming while no one listened. Waking up was worse. The silence of the house was heavy, filled with the ghosts of who I used to be. I wasn't eating much. I drank peppermint tea to calm the nausea, but it only dulled the edge. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed beside Ryan, his back turned, his breathing slow and oblivious. My eyes would sting from holding in tears, my hands curled into fists beneath the covers. I kept a pillow between us, not for comfort, for distance. There were moments I wanted to give up, moments when I nearly deleted the files, burned the prenup, and whispered, let's just try again. Because even pain felt safer than the unknown. But every time those thoughts crept in, I'd touch my belly, a flutter, faint but real, proof that something inside me still had hope. One night, I slipped into the bathroom and sat on the cold tile floor. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, the dark circles, the brittle smile, the eyes that used to light up when I talked about teaching. I stared for a long time. Then I whispered, this isn't who I am. I picked up my journal and began writing. Not about Ryan, not about the betrayal, just about what I missed. Sunlight through the kitchen window, the smell of lavender soap, Sunday mornings with nowhere to be. I wrote a list titled, What I Want My Child to Know. The first line, love should never feel like fear. The next morning, I put on makeup for the first time in weeks. It wasn't much, just mascara and a soft blush, but it made me feel visible again. Jenny texted me that day, still with you, you've got this. I didn't respond, just smiled through the tears. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to keep going, even when you're terrified, especially then. That same week, I received a holiday card from one of my former students, just a scribbled note in uneven handwriting. Miss Emily, you are the nicest teacher. I hope your Christmas is warm. I I held that card to my chest and sobbed. Not for Ryan, not even for the pain. I cried for the version of me that child remembered, kind, open, strong. I began taking slow walks in the mornings, wrapped in Ryan's old hoodie. The air was cold, crisp, but it cleared my head. I stopped by the little coffee shop on the corner where the barista still remembered my name. You haven't been around in a while, she said, handing me a decaf chai with extra cinnamon. No, I said quietly, but I'm coming back. One afternoon, I lit a candle and played a record I hadn't touched in years, an old Nina Simone vinyl, slightly scratched, still perfect. I sat in the living room with my journal and wrote down one word, survive. Then I crossed it out and wrote reclaim. That night, I cooked dinner and didn't wait for Ryan to sit first. I served myself what I liked, lit a candle just for me, and let the silence feel like safety instead of suffocation. And for the first time in a long time, I slept through the night without waking in fear. The darkness hadn't left, but I had found a match. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. I started moving with intention, folding laundry with care, making lists not for survival, but for structure. Each small act was a quiet rebellion against the chaos he tried to drown me in. I wasn't healed yet, but I was standing, and for now, that was enough. One evening, I caught myself humming while doing the dishes. It startled me. A sound so small, so ordinary, yet so powerful. I hadn't heard myself hum in months. In that moment, I realized um, I wasn't waiting for peace anymore. I was becoming it. Healing didn't arrive like a sunrise. It crept in soft and slow through the cracks Ryan had left behind. I started with small things. I replaced the cracked mug he hated with one that read, Grow through what you go through. I played music while folding laundry. I opened the curtains even on cloudy days. The light felt like something sacred. Jenny came by more often. She brought casseroles, court documents, and soft blankets. She never pushed. She just sat beside me and helped me highlight what mattered. We reread the prenup, annotated the addendum, and uploaded backups to multiple drives. We're not building a case, she said. We're building a shield. I started seeing a therapist once a week. I told her everything, not just about Ryan, but about how I had forgotten myself. She asked me once, what do you want to feel when you wake up? The question haunted me in the best way. Empowered, I finally called my sister Beth and told her everything. She cried. Then she drove over with a duffel bag and stayed the weekend. We didn't talk much, just cooked together, watched old rom-coms, and laughed when her toddler tried to feed popcorn to my growing belly. My body was changing. I noticed it more during quiet moments. My skin softer, my feet swelling, the way my breath caught when the baby kicked. And I let it all happen without shame. I bought a maternity dress Ryan would have called frumpy and wore it proudly to the grocery store. One afternoon, I stood in the nursery, still just an empty room with beige walls and unopened boxes. I picked up a paintbrush. I chose sage green, calm, new, mine. Each stroke felt like a reclamation. I wasn't painting for Ryan. I was painting for the girl I used to be, the one who decorated dorm rooms with fairy lights and believed in Sunday pancakes. Jenny helped me set up a separate bank account. "This is yours," she said, handing me the card. "Every cent of it." I cried, not because of the money, but because it felt like freedom. As Christmas approached, I wrapped gifts alone for the first time in years. No criticisms, no sighs. I even wrapped one for myself and placed it under the tree. A journal, a new one, for beginnings. When Ryan laughed with Nate about how I'd react to the divorce papers, I didn't flinch. I just listened from the hallway, steady and invisible. Let them have their moment, I thought. It would be their last. The strength didn't come all at once. Some days I still shook. Some nights I stared too long at the ceiling. But the fear no longer drowned me. It simply reminded me I was alive and learning. I wore confidence like new shoes, not yet broken in, but mine all the same. To revenge. I didn't want revenge. I wanted safety and dignity and a life where I could sing off key while cleaning the kitchen without being told to keep it down. So I practiced, one deep breath at a time. I also started documenting my days, not just to collect proof, but to witness my own survival. One page for gratitude, one for fears, and one for small victories. Didn't cry today, ate lunch sitting down, laughed at something on purpose. Beth surprised me with a rocking chair for the nursery. It came in a huge, flat box. We spent 2 hours assembling it, swearing under our breath and eating trail mix between steps. When it finally stood, slightly crooked but sturdy, I sat down and felt something unfamiliar ripple through me. Peace. Sometimes I'd catch Ryan watching me from across the room with a strange expression. Suspicion, maybe, or confusion. Like he couldn't quite place what had shifted. But he never asked. That suited me fine. I didn't owe him explanations for my healing. I wasn't performing it for applause. I was reclaiming the silence he once filled with cruelty and turning it into space I could finally breathe in. I knew the moment was coming. The Christmas dinner, the envelope, the act he'd planned with smug precision. What he didn't know, what he'd never imagined, was that I'd turned every scar into a compass. I was already facing the exit. Ready. I folded his dress shirt one final time, smoothing the collar with care. Not out of love, out of closure, as the next fold would be mine. Into a suitcase I'd packed in quiet, deliberate triumph. And this time, I was the one leaving. Christmas Day arrived like a scene from a postcard. Soft snow, clinking glasses, laughter echoing in the hall. Ryan was in rare form, wearing the reindeer sweater I'd bought him last year. He carved the turkey like he was hosting a cooking show, performing for his parents, his best friend Nate, my sister Beth, and her husband. I floated through it all, refilling wine, offering pie, playing my role one last time. Ryan caught my eye across the table, gave me a wink, the smirk I'd seen 100 times before, the one he wore when he thought he was 10 steps ahead. I smiled back. As the plates cleared and wine settled in, he stood and tapped his glass. Before dessert, I have something special for my lovely wife. Beth, genuinely expecting something romantic, clasped her hands. I held her gaze for a second and gave the smallest nod. Ryan pulled an envelope from his blazer. "Merry Christmas," he said, placing it in front of me. The room hushed. I opened it without expression. The words at the top read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Already signed, already filed." A highlighted clause danced near the bottom. I looked up. His smile widened. "Thank you," I said, then calmly pulled a silver pen from my clutch, signed the papers in a single elegant motion, capped the pen, and slid the envelope back. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it," I said, then reached under the table and placed a gold-wrapped box between his plate and his glass. "What's this?" "Your gift." He opened it, smirk still present, until he saw the folder inside. The color drained from his face. He flipped through the pages. His signature. Notarized, dated, amended. Ironclad. "It's the prenup you signed last February," I said. "You laughed, remember?" Beth blinked. Nate leaned in. "What is this?" "His signature. His terms," I said. "Now legally binding, especially since I filed first." Ryan started. "I prepared," I interrupted, voice even. He stared at the document like he could will it to change. But it was turned. "And one more thing," I added, pulling out a smaller envelope. He hesitated, then opened it. "A sonogram. I'm 8 weeks," I said softly. There was a beat of stunned silence. He looked at me, then at the photo. For a second, something human flickered in his eyes. Then realization set in. "Prenup, pregnancy, custody. You planned this," he whispered. "No," I said, voice calm. "You bet I'd cry." "I didn't plan. I prepared." The room shifted. Beth reached under the table and squeezed my hand. His father cleaned his glasses. His mother sat motionless, pearl necklace trembling. Ryan's jaw moved, but no sound followed. "You think you've won," he muttered. I didn't respond. I simply stood, gathered empty dessert plates, and asked, "Apple or pecan?" No one answered. Only silence remained. And power, mine. He didn't follow me when I walked to the kitchen. He didn't say a word when I returned with whipped cream and began quietly serving dessert. Beth leaned close and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded, steady. "I've never been more okay." Ryan's mother excused herself to the restroom. His father reached for more wine but poured too much, spilling a few drops onto the white linen. Nate, suddenly less smug, stared down at his plate, unsure of whose side he was supposed to be on now. No one dared speak first. It wasn't just the prenup. It was the performance. His unraveling at the head of a perfectly set holiday table, the one he used to lord over like a CEO. He looked smaller now, not physically, but in presence. Like the illusion had cracked wide open, and all that remained was a man caught in his own trap. I stood to clear the dishes, and as I reached for Ryan's plate, I met his eyes. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" I replied, tilting my head. "Don't take everything." I smiled. "I'm not. You gave it." He sat back, fingers pressed together as if in prayer, staring at the documents like they might evaporate. But they didn't. I stacked the empty plates neatly, then turned to the rest of the table. "Desserts in the kitchen if anyone still has room." Beth followed me out, stopping me by the counter. "You didn't just hold your ground," she said. "You moved the whole battlefield." I let out a slow breath, one I didn't know I'd been holding. "I needed to." Back at the table. Ryan still hadn't moved. He looked like a man who had built his castle on sand and was just now realizing the tide had come in. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat, and I just stood taller because that night, for the first time in years, I had nothing left to fear and everything ahead to gain. After everyone left, I walked through the quiet house, turning off lights. The pine-scented candles still flickered on the mantel, casting soft shadows. I stood for a moment, hand resting on my belly. Not to celebrate. It's a promise. This child would never grow up thinking love came with conditions, and I'd never again confuse silence with safety. Um, we were free. Not everyone can see a marriage rotting from the inside. Outsiders only see the wedding photos, vacation selfies, anniversary tributes. They don't notice the slight wince after a joke at her expense, the long pause before speaking, or the hollow look of someone standing in a fully stocked kitchen that somehow feels like a desert. I used to be that woman, the one who said, he's just tired, or it's not a big deal, or I'm fine. It wasn't fine. It began with jokes that didn't feel like jokes. What would you even do without me? He'd laugh. So did everyone else. I smiled too, but my stomach always tightened. Then came the subtle control, choosing my clothes, suggesting I shouldn't see certain friends, correcting my tone when I spoke to his colleagues. Little by little, I withdrew. I stopped posting online. I canceled on friends. I left messages unanswered. I was scared he'd think I was sharing too much. For a long time, I thought I was weak for not leaving the moment things got bad. But the truth is, I was planning. I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I was waiting to be ready, not for revenge, but for safety, for certainty, for no turning back. Jenny, my one remaining close friend, handed me the first pen. No lectures, no pity, just a quiet look that said, I'm here. I began documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every night he didn't come home, every offhand remark that made my skin crawl. Not to build a case for others, but to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it, that I had a right to leave. The trap Ryan tried to spring on Christmas wasn't a surprise. He never thought I was smart enough to see beyond my emotions. He thought women always break down in tears and panic. But he forgot something. Those who stay quiet the longest are often the ones waiting for the right moment to speak. And I did. There was no applause, no cheering, just Beth's teary, proud eyes, and the slow nod from Ryan's father when he realized his son had just lost control of the room. After that night, I asked myself if I regretted anything. Staying silent too long, enduring years instead of walking away sooner. But the answer came one winter morning when I woke up in a house with no slammed doors, no stale whiskey breath, no guessing someone else's mood before I spoke. I felt light. That was my first taste of freedom. One afternoon, I opened an old email folder, the one that held the scanned prenup, screenshots, journal entries. I labeled it Proof I Lived, not survived, lived. I began writing letters to my unborn daughter. She already carried the legacy of resilience. I wanted her to know her mother once shook, once bent, but never broke. For every woman belittled, controlled, laughed at for feeling too much or dreaming too big, I hope they all get their own Christmas. Not because of the lights or the tree, but because it's the day they can look someone dead in the eye and with zero fear say, I'm ready. I didn't flip the dining table. I just pulled out my chair and walked away. And I've never looked back. I'm not the first woman to walk away from a broken marriage. And I certainly won't be the last. There are thousands, millions of women still living in homes that look peaceful from the outside, but are prisons, lined with pretty rugs. They are hit, aren't screamed at in public, but are slowly suffocated every day by silence, control, and emotional absence. They hear things like, "You're lucky to have me," "Don't overreact," "You're too sensitive." These words wear away at self worth like water on stone. Bit by bit, but one day they'll realize their silence wasn't consent, their patience wasn't weakness, and their kindness wasn't meant to be exploited. I don't share this story to be admired. I share it to remind others awakening doesn't come in a single magical night. It comes in quiet acts, in small decisions, in getting up one more time after falling. When I signed those divorce papers in front of my husband during a holiday dinner he thought would showcase my defeat, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I had returned to myself. I was again a woman with a voice, a choice, and a future not tied to anyone else's permission. I don't fear comments like, "She broke her family," or "She's manipulative." I know what I endured. I held our family together longer than most would have. But a family isn't truly whole if one person has to disappear for the other to be comfortable. Women don't need to become anyone else. They just need to be allowed to fully be themselves, unbroken, undiluted. If you're reading this and see yourself in my story, I want you to know you're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not overly sensitive. You are living a truth that others refuse to see, and you can get out. You don't need a dramatic moment. You don't need revenge. You just need one step, then another, and then the whole path reveals itself. It won't be easy, but it leads somewhere bright, somewhere you're heard, loved, and whole. I call that place starting over, and it's more beautiful than I ever imagined. I know one day my daughter will grow up and ask, "What did you do when no one believed you deserved better?" And I'll look her in the eyes, smile, and say, "I believed in myself." That's the legacy I'll leave her. Not a war, but a quiet revolution. Not shouted, but lived with resolve. Because the next generation deserves to begin without shadows.